All right, welcome into PFF at Night. It is June 22nd. I'm Ari Meirov. Doug Hyde is getting some well-deserved time off. I am joined here by Brad Spielberger and our guest replacement, PFF NFL analyst Seth Galina. Great to see you guys, Brad, Seth. Let's jump right into it because there's a lot going on in the NFL, despite the fact that we are in June and there shouldn't be much going on. But a lot is going on in the NFL, and I want to get right into it because the NFL never sleeps. And we'll start off with Deshaun Watson. We got some news yesterday that it was announced by Tony Busby that he has settled 20 out of the 24 civil lawsuits that were filed against him. I guess let me start over here because there are a few factors. First of all, the fact that this happened, this has no effect on what the NFL will ultimately decide with discipline. The NFL has done their own investigation. They have their own personal conduct policy. They do how they think. And whatever their investigation ends up entailing, that will be their decision. And the hope and the belief has been that they'll have a decision by early July. I would keep an eye on July 1st on a Friday going to July 4th weekend. As for Watson settling, he has had this chance to settle a number of times, dating back to last year, including at the trade deadline when the Dolphins were trying to trade for him. And owner Stephen Ross told him, we're not going to trade for you unless you settle all 22 cases. He was offered $100,000 to each plaintiff. Only 18 were okay with it. And Deshaun decided, if I can't get all of them, I'm leaving it alone. So he kept it going from there. The Dolphins never made the trade. But this thing has gotten to a point where it feels like there's too much going out. He has a new team. It became too much of a distraction. He ultimately decided to settle with as many as he could. For the Browns, it's good news for them. They hope now that it won't be as noisy as it's been as of late, and we'll see where this goes from here. But the NFL will eventually hand out discipline, and as I said, that should be coming up very soon. So let's open it up here. Brad, let me go to you. What do you think about what's going on with Deshaun Watson right now?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing here is, as you mentioned, him reversing course. He was very consistent throughout that he was not going to settle. He wanted to argue and fight for his innocence. And what I'm keeping an eye on is he's also been adamant throughout that he has no need for and no desire to participate in any type of therapy or talking with anyone about what happened. I've gone back and looked at prior cases, Ben Roethlisberger, even Tank Johnson for separate issues, but another player who faced discipline. And Roger Goodell has been very, very consistent with this personal conduct policy that if you take steps to show that you've learned from your mistakes and want to continue to grow and learn from those mistakes, in Roethlisberger's case specifically, going to see a therapist, that it could then reduce your suspension. I'm wondering if Watson also now reverses course on that long-held stance as well.
Yeah, it's a good point. Probably.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was saying, doesn't that the second I know it's very cynical, but the second he says, I need a therapist or I'm okay with getting a therapist, I know it's not an actual admission of guilt, but I mean, it sets like socially, I'm not saying not legally, but socially it sets the precedent that this is something that there is at least some empathy for, even if it's just a superficial level of empathy. And then we get to the point where it's like, well, then what's going on here? Like, what actually happened in these to get us to this point here? So that's where I'm at with all this stuff, where it's like we keep getting, and again, settlements are not like legal, like settlements are not like means you did anything or did not do anything, but like feels like every time there's something that unlocks itself in this Deshaun Watson dilemma, we get closer and closer to him kind of saying what's going on. You know what I mean? Like, and like we're getting closer and closer to that. Very interested to see what the NFL knows. They obviously know everything, and how many games they're going to suspend him for, because I think they would love nothing more than to get this out of the way, even if I don't think it'll be a full year suspension, but even if it is a full year suspension, and just kind of shove this thing under the rug and then say, okay, well, we did it. We did our part. Which is suspending him and punishing him and doing all that stuff. And then trying to come back in 2023 like nothing happened. I think they would love to do that.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this, but the NFL cares about their image so much. And I think the optics matter to them. And somebody brought this up to me. Like, if they were not to do a 1 year suspension, I feel like people are going to bring up, you guys suspended Calvin Ridley for a year for doing a couple of parlay bets. And now you're going to suspend this guy for less for what is going on over here. I think the NFL looks at this stuff and they want to make sure it doesn't look too lenient, considering especially how the news cycle has been going over the last few weeks. The court of public opinion, for the most part, has, from what I see, has swayed a little bit to the other side, right? The way it looks like right now. And the only difference really is, when you mention Roethlisberger and all those guys, is that the personal conduct policy under this new CBA, it has changed a little bit. Usually up until now, it was Goodell makes a decision. That's the final decision, and we're moving on. There's obviously appeal for the player, but still ends up going to a joint arbitrator who ultimately decides, but it was always Goodell who makes the decision. Now we have a scenario here where there's an independently arbitrator who's agreed by the NFLPA and NFL. It's Sue Robinson. She gets all the investigation stuff that the NFL investigates. She gets all the notes. The NFLPA and NFL make their arguments on what they believe the suspension should be. Then she makes her initial suspension. From there, Roger Goodell has the rights to add games or make it less, and he ultimately has the final decision. But because of this, the NFLPA is able to make their argument as well. I would not be shocked at all if Sue Robinson's decision comes out as well, in case Roger Goodell just changes it to something drastically different. So there are a couple of different elements when it comes to this as well, when you're comparing it to other cases. Brad, any final words before we move on to the next topic here?
Yeah, I mean, this ties in the next topic a little bit as well. But in that personal conduct policy, in plain writing, it states that owners will be held to a higher standard and face stricter punishment than players. And the NFLPA, and look, I don't think anyone on this panel thinks that Deshaun Watson does not deserve a lengthy suspension, but they're going to argue, and they have a legitimate argument in saying, if that's the plain language of your policy, and Dan Snyder has a new sexual harassment suit coming out every 5 minutes, including today during the hearing, Goodell getting asked about new things that were coming to light during the hearing, and has not faced significant punishment, really, that's where it kind of becomes a little bit potentially ugly between the two sides.
And the Washington Post did report that the NFLPA's argument will be that how owners are treated compared to players, it's basically night and day. You mentioned Dan Snyder. We could go back to Robert Kraft or also Jim Irsay when he got a suspension, but it wasn't really a full-blown investigation. And besides for that, if you compare owners and players, owners still get all the revenue they make. Players, they don't get any of their salary. So there are ways to argue this for the NFLPA side. We'll see how that goes. You mentioned Dan Snyder. One of the big topics going on today is that Roger Goodell, the NFL commissioner, testified in front of Congress in regards to the Washington Commanders' workplace misconduct. For people who watched it, I had it on here in my office as some background noise. It was, for the most part, a clown show. It was a bit of a mess, but probably the most noteworthy thing that came out of it was that Dan Snyder will be subpoenaed. Dan Snyder originally, when he was invited to this, said that he will not show up because he's in France. And as soon as the thing started, they announced that he will be subpoenaed, and we will see now if he does show up to testify. They want it to happen next week. But overall, there really wasn't much coming out of this. Roger Goodell got a couple of questions about, could you remove Dan Snyder? His answer was, I don't have authority to do that. But overall, we really didn't get much. And we've been keeping tabs on this whole Washington thing for a good couple of years now, and it feels like a lot of things come out basically every week. But the NFL has been consistent that we are not releasing the report, even though we released the Deflategate report, we released the Jonathan Martin and Rich Incognito report. With this Washington investigation, we're keeping it under tabs, and it sounds like they are staying consistent that it's not going to happen. But we'll see where this goes if Dan Snyder does show up next week. Brad, any thoughts on what you saw when you took a look at what happened today?
Yeah, just what I just referenced, Goodell did say that Mary Jo White has been hired as an independent counsel to look into this latest allegation against the Washington Commanders and Dan Snyder specifically. you start to wonder at what point does, it become too many issues and too many allegations. But also, you mentioned that the biggest takeaway was, I want to say it was a 450-page report on Deflategate, and they released a 5-page document about this issue with the Washington Commanders that, Goodell was consistent that the reason for that was because some people involved asked for the report to not be written and instead be oral to protect their identities. Long story short, there was a lot of questions of whether this is a good use of Congress's time. But I do think, it probably is a good thing that we're now seeing, toxic workplaces and harassment being handled at the highest levels and not being allowed to be kicked under the rug as it so often is.
Yeah, well, one thing I'll say before
it wasn't released. Yeah. Sorry. The Deflategate and the Jonathan Martin stuff was released because it only implicates workers, whereas this stuff implicates people who make a lot of money in the league, and probably not just Dan Snyder and the top brass at Washington. So again, it's a cynical view, but it's probably the right view.
Exactly. And I think going back to what we said originally, that's probably the NFLPA's argument going to be when it comes to Deshaun Watson. The only thing I'll say about this whole Washington thing is that this whole story was basically dead last year, and it only came back to light because of those John Gruden emails, which I don't know who leaked it. A lot of people believe it was either the NFL or it was Snyder or it was Washington, whoever it was. But the whole story was dead. As soon as those John Gruden emails came out, everyone started wondering about the Washington emails once again. Ever since that happened, Congress has gotten involved. It's become a whole story. There's new reports basically every other week. And now it's getting really serious, and it's only going to continue as the weeks go. All right, let's get into some real football here. Rob Gronkowski announced that he is officially retiring for a second time yesterday. I don't know if I should use the word officially because there is a chance he might come back. But Seth, were you surprised that he retired, especially that Tom Brady is back? We all thought he would retire when Tom Brady did, but when Tom Brady came back, we all thought it would be an obvious thing that he'll be back as well. I guess not. What do you think about this news?
Yeah, I thought that he would have retired after the season, like you said, when Tom Brady retired, closer to the end of last season, and then he would have came back for training camp, let's say, because I think we're definitely in a position where he does not need to go to training camp. He needs to save his body as much as he can if he's going to play again. And I think that's what people still believe. I would only say that because this happened so late, that maybe, just maybe, this is for real. Because I think if he would have just said, okay, let me take this time off at the end of the season and then clear my head and whatever, then he maybe comes back after. But because this happened, a couple of days ago, whatever it was, to me, it feels like it might be real this time. And honestly, I wouldn't, he did play pretty good at times last year, but I mean, at the end of the day, he doesn't have the same. His body is just breaking down, day after day. So I would not say if this was actually the end for Gronkowski, which kind of sad, I guess.
Yeah, one of the greatest tight ends in NFL history for sure. And, it was just interesting to me, Brad, because his agent comes out right away and is like, I could see a scenario where Tom Brady calls and he'll be back. I'm like, so why not just not retire and just wait a little bit? But it's made me wonder, do you feel like maybe there's a contract element to this? Tight ends, as we've mentioned in the past, are fairly underpaid. Does Rob want to get paid more? I was a bit surprised that this guy's been in the NFL for 11 years. His career earnings, you would think, is like over 100 million. It's at 70 for career earnings, which is severely underpaid for one of the best tight ends in the NFL during his time. Do you feel like maybe there's a contract element to this, the fact that it happened this late?
Yeah, I mean, he signed a 6-year extension after just 2 seasons because he was, in the prior CBA when he came into the league. And a lot of folks have kind of said he alone has suppressed, not that, it was his fault, but the tight end market was suppressed because whenever a guy beneath him said, I want to get paid more, they would just point to Rob Gronkowski and say, well, you're not as good as him, so why should you make more than him? And that argument worked for a lot of clubs. So I think they would have given him, kind of the 1 year, $8 or $9 million flyer that he's been signing the last couple of years. I think as Seth pointed out, I mean, every position is grueling, but tight end might be the most physically grueling position in the NFL because you both have to be in the trenches and blocking, as he is still good at doing, and then also be running routes over the middle and having guys trying to cut your head off. So it's kind of this dynamic of both of those things. As for the Rosenhaus comments, I think this new trend, not a trend, but Eric Weddle coming back for the Los Angeles Rams last year just to play in the playoffs, wear the green dot, and win a ring. I think that is a possibility if the Buccaneers have a good regular season. The 17 games now is also maybe part of his thinking, but maybe he comes back. I mean, Cameron Brate and Cade Otton, a rookie, are the top 2 tight ends on the roster now in Tampa Bay. The position goes from a strength to a bit of a weakness. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens, but I don't think he is actually going to play a full season of football because it's a lot to do to your body. He already retired before 30, I think, like Seth said, it's different than a March retirement when it happens in late June.
Yeah, and I guess if this is it for Gronk, we'll see him in Canton in 5 years. If it's not, we might see him in November, December, and playoff football for Tampa Bay. That is yet to be determined, but I guess we really should not use the word officially retired for Gronk until he actually does not play a full year, or until Tom Brady officially retires, because he's on the record that will not play with any other quarterback. Seth, you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I would just add that, piggybacking on what Brad is saying about the tight end room in Tampa, there's not like, it's such a good room that they'll be fine without him. It's very possible that, Brady's a good player, and obviously Auden, a rookie, could be pretty good, but there's no guarantee that the tight end room is going to be up to par, I guess, let's say. And so, if that was the case, if you had these 2 other tight ends in there who you knew were pretty good, then I would say probably less of a chance. But, you get to the middle of the season and Brady's looking around saying, man, I need that security blanket. Tight ends are not up to par this season, then I'm sure he'll put the call in.
Yep, and Tom Brady already has responded to the tweet about him possibly calling him during the season. I would not be surprised at all if it actually does happen. Let's move over to Pittsburgh. They make a free agent move yesterday, signing Larry Ogunjobi, the former Brown and Bengal, now joins his 3rd AFC North team. I guess we'll keep it simple here. The Steelers have been fairly busy when it comes to free agency this offseason. And considering when last year, when Melvin Ingram didn't work, Mike Tomlin said, we want volunteers, not hostages, for them to actually go out and sign a bunch of free agents is a bit surprising to me. But it's a team that no one is really talking about in the AFC North. I guess we'll start with Seth. What do you think about this Steelers team going into this year? They draft a first-round quarterback. Usually when that happens, there's cameras all over the place. We want to know what's going on. It's been super quiet in Pittsburgh and what's going on over there. What do you think about them?
Yeah, I feel like that's got to tell you something about how the league feels about that quarterback they took in the first round. Like I said, even though it's a first-round quarterback, he was pick 20 or something. So the first quarterback off the board, 20. Pick 20. So I think that tells you a lot about where this team is. I know they're, because of the, I guess I'll say, organizational health of that team over the past 15 years under Tomlin, even before that under Cowher. Like, you believe that they can compete again. And considering that the quarterback situation over the past 2 years with old man Ben Roethlisberger was so bad that almost anything could be better than that, even though, that's a Hall of Famer we're talking about. I think that there's still some upside to this team. I think there's still some hope to this team. But, the issue is going to be the division's pretty tough. You got a lot of good quarterbacks in the division. Obviously, we'll see what happens with Deshaun Watson, but, the other 2 teams at least have pretty good young quarterbacks. So the roster is okay. It's going to be based on, can they figure out a scheme that kind of puts them over the top? Matt Canada is going to get his real first shot to be an offensive coordinator this year, because with Ben Roethlisberger, you're kind of stuck in whatever Ben Roethlisberger does or does not want to do on offense. I think I will say that I don't think it would surprise any of us if Mitchell Trubisky was starting quarterback week 1. If Pickett's not ready, if they feel like, Trubisky having been in the league, I think that would be, again, it's like, man, if Trubisky's starting that, it would change my outlook a little bit. I think if they put Pickett in, at least for game 1, I would at least feel like, okay, maybe he showed something in practice and training camp and stuff. But the defense should be good. Like you said, Ogunjobi, kind of to replace Stephon Tuitt, who unfortunately retired last week. So defense is still going to be good. It's just the O-line. The O-line's pretty rough. Quarterback situation might be rough. And guess how you win games? O-line and quarterback. So I don't know.
Yeah, Brad, it's interesting because he mentions quarterbacks and offensive line. It was Trubisky and Pickett. There was James Daniels, Mason Cole in free agency. But when it comes to just cash spending, they have the most money on defense in the league. They have the least money on offense when it comes to this year. So what is your outlook when it comes to the Steelers this year? Because it's such an interesting team. And as I said, nobody is talking about them the way we would usually talk about Pittsburgh.
It is weird how quiet it is. Yeah, you mentioned, their cap allocation is literally number 1 in the league on defense and 32nd on offense. And, I think the issue last year was they still kind of got gashed against the run. That loss of Stephon Tuitt, he didn't play last season, even though he was under contract, was massive. And Ogunjobi is a guy that he signed this 1-year flyer only because he failed a physical with the Chicago Bears. He's actually going to sign a very substantial multi-year deal with them before that physical. Like you said also, Ari, the Steelers
do not really... That, Brad?
I mean, it's going to be tough if he has a great year, right? And that he could have been a Chicago Bear. I will say that deal was substantial. I want to say it was around $14 million per year. We haven't seen the details yet for this deal, but I'm guessing it's like a 1-year, $5 or $6 million flyer. So, I mean, that Bears defense is going to be interesting. But nevertheless, now you're getting me off topic now. It's not going to be good. But I'm not sure if I want it to be good, frankly. Yeah, exactly. But no, I mean, the Steelers team, the defense is going to need to win them games, which obviously they're used to doing in years past. But this AFC North is a different division. The game of football is a different game. And yeah, I mean, we'll see if it's a winning recipe in 2022, but they have some work cut out for them for sure.
Yep, and they've also added Miles Jack, Levi Wallace, Jannard Avery, DeMarvin Leal in the 3rd round, George Pickens in the 2nd round. And as we all know, the famous stat, Mike Tomlin has never had a losing season in his coaching career. So definitely will be an interesting year for the Steelers. While we are on the Steelers topic and Mike Tomlin did an amazing interview on The Pivot with Ryan Clark and his crew. And one of the topics that were brought up is Antonio Brown. And I think the question was meant to be, will you bring back Antonio Brown to retire as a Steeler, not to play? But he took it as literally to play. And Mike basically said, that ain't happening. And obviously it's not happening. But while we are talking about Antonio Brown, it obviously ended really rough in Tampa Bay. I think everyone saw what happened in that game against the Jets. Do you guys see him playing this year? And if so, where could he possibly play? Seth, let's start off with you.
I don't see him being on a week 1 roster. And I think it's going to take some pretty some injury, some poor performance by a receiving unit over the course of a season to get him back. I don't think teams want to take the player on right now off the field. When you watched him in Tampa Bay last year, he could still play. I mean, we're talking about a Hall of Famer here, and a guy who, had not had this off the field stuff, is still playing at probably a high level. He's not that old, right? So it's just, man, like it just happens every year with him. Something. And I don't think teams, like I said, for sure not a week 1 player. Maybe as the season goes on, I mean, there's obviously going to be a lot of teams that are looking for receiver help. I mean, I'm looking through the teams now. In New England, could probably use him, though obviously he has issues there. He had issues there in New England for with the 1 game he played, so that's not going to happen. The Giants could use him. The Jets could use him. Detroit could use him. You know what I mean? I'm just going through the teams. So many teams could use him because he really was that good on the field. It's just no one's going to take a chance on him unless it's super dire straits.
Yeah, the problem is always going to be the other stuff that he comes in with. What happened in Tampa Bay, the way it ended, is definitely probably not going to help. And I think people forget he needed ankle surgery. That was one of the reasons why he didn't want to go back on the field. He recently said he still has not gotten that ankle surgery, and he's only going to get it once he's back on a team. I don't know which team will be okay with that. But Brad, do you see any scenario where Antonio Brown is back with the team this year?
It's an interesting strategy. I saw him jumping off a stage at a concert. So the ankle, it could be worse, I guess. I will just say too, I hadn't watched The Pivot before until that episode with Mike Tomlin. If you watch that and don't want to run through a brick wall for Mike Tomlin, you don't have a pulse. And B, I've now watched 4 episodes today. That podcast is awesome. So shout out The Pivot. But yeah, no, I think the big thing is that you need a quarterback that basically goes to the executives and says, I want this guy on my football team. I don't care about the outside distractions. Make it happen. And I think that list of guys was probably Tom Brady. And then I think he had a relationship with Russell Wilson, who's now on a new team. And, maybe Lamar Jackson in part because he's related to Hollywood Brown, who is no longer on the Baltimore Ravens. So you go down the list of guys that maybe would stick their neck out for him. And I'm not sure that list exists anymore. Like Seth said, though, the guy talent-wise is probably a first balloter. Mike Tomlin was talking on the podcast about how he has one of the best work ethics he's ever seen and is the most fearless player he's ever watched at wide receiver, especially for a guy who was not, a big, he said, not 6'4" and 200 and a quarter. It's sad that it ended this way because he was still playing at a high level, but I think his playing days are probably done.
Yeah, the teams you mentioned there, Broncos of Wilson or Lamar Jackson and the Ravens, I just don't know if those GMs would do it. I have a hard time seeing it. And while we're talking about Tomlin, we did a segment last week about people on TV. We probably should have included Mike Tomlin as well. If he ever wants to go in that route, he would be fantastic as well. All right, one more thing here. Brad, you have a really good piece up on PFF.com right now titled 3-Year Analysis for All 32 NFL Teams. You basically ranked where each team currently sits in salary cap and roster construction health, and you based it off 5 different categories. I guess dive into how that all works, how it all came to fruition for you, and how you ended up with the Bengals at number 1 and so on.
Yeah, well, first, thank you. So, we're always trying to look at the future outlook. As everyone knows, these rosters can change year to year. And I think most importantly, you can kind of forecast what teams potentially could do in the following offseason. So, the Bengals and Chargers were both, I think, in the top 5 of last year's list. And, they went on some spending sprees and made some big moves this year. So, what we really want to look at is for starters, just pure cap space, obviously. And then we want to look at how many rookie contract players do they have. So a team like the Bengals is going to look good because, Burrow, Chase, and Higgins and all these players, not only are they elite players, they're also on these massive surplus value contracts. The biggest change this year is that we try to also reflect just how good your roster actually is. Seth Saints and all those fans and other teams kind of say, who cares about cap space if your team stinks? And that is fair. And that's a criticism I'm used to hearing. So try to inflate the value. They still came ranked 32nd, but try to kind of inflate the value of how good the team is and incorporate that into the equation as well. But yeah, I appreciate that. Check it out on PFF.com. And you can kind of see where does the roster stand now? What does their ability to add talent look like going forward? And it maybe kind of helps you forecast the next couple of years of the NFL.
Yeah, it's right now.
Here's what I'll say about the Saints.
I was going to give you the final thoughts on your Saints before we wrap this up. I need to hear this.
No, it's one thought. There's not multiple thoughts. It is one thought. I don't care about your rankings. You know why? The Saints are going to win the Super Bowl.
There you go. In Mickey, we trust.
In Mickey, we trust. That is the motto in New Orleans.
I will say the thing with the Saints is like
I do have more than one thought of it.
Because I think Loomis has obviously they've been like quote unquote all in, and I hate to use the term got lucky, but they've hit on a lot of stuff that they've done. They've hit on a ton of stuff that they've done in terms of player evaluation. I think is the main thing, and they're still in a good position to win games next year. I think the thing that worries me is like they're replacing some people on defense, especially in the secondary, at safety. Cam Jordan a year older. Marcus Davenport showed that he could be a good player, but we're not sure yet. And if the defense falters a little bit, I think that's what scares me a little bit.
I know we're trying to wrap up, but I'll just really quickly. I do think with both safeties, obviously, like you said, going from Marcus Williams and Malcolm Jenkins to Tyrann Mathieu and Marcus May coming off the injury. Both of those deals, though, I thought were great values. Jarvis Landry on a 1-year, $3 million flyer is objectively a phenomenal value. So they did well, I think, in what they could do. But yeah, that's the game they're playing. It all comes down to famous Jameis at the end of the day, though.
All right, so that will wrap up this episode of PFF at Night. Brad, Seth, it was great seeing you guys. Everyone can follow you on Twitter. It is for Brad, PFF underscore Brad. For Seth, PFF underscore Seth. Fairly simple. And for me, at My Sports Update. We will be back early next week with more news and analysis. Make sure to check out PFF.com. For Brad's article, I have an article up as well on the next extensions coming up around the NFL. Seth, you have a lot of stuff going on the site as well. Everyone check it out, and we'll be back early next week.